This engine was so powerful, so iconic, that it turned highways into legends and drivers into heroes. But why did the Detroit 8V92, a machine celebrated for its unbeatable power, disappear almost overnight? Stick around as we unravel the shocking story of how an engine, adored by the trucking world, became its own downfall. Before we move on, I will like you to subscribe to the channel and like the video. The 8V92 earned its title of King of the Highway because it embodied everything you could want in a workhorse for the road. At its core was a V8 two-stroke design, capable of producing anywhere between 350 to over 475 horsepower, depending on its configuration. Those numbers might not look groundbreaking now, but back then, they were enough to dominate the heavy-duty truck market. In the late 1970s and early 80s, this engine wasn't just an option, it was the gold standard. Owner-operators swore by its ability to conquer grueling routes, and fleet managers praised how it kept their trucks moving with less downtime. What really set it apart, though, was how it paired raw power with clever engineering. The 8V92 was part of Detroit Diesel's 92 series, and its modular design made it easier to maintain. If something broke, you didn't have to pull apart the entire engine to fix it. Mechanics could replace individual components without losing days of operation, which kept repair costs lower and trucks loaded. And these trucks weren't just hauling average loads either. With the 8V92 under the hood, fully loaded semis could ascend steep mountain grades at highway speeds when competing engines would struggle in the same conditions. It gave truckers the freedom to drive without compromise, no matter the terrain or the weight behind them. But no legend comes without complications. While the 8V92's success was clear from sales numbers and road performance, there were whispers of challenges even at the height of its dominance. Some began to question whether the engine's monumental power came with a price. For starters, its two-stroke design, unique as it was, came with its own set of quirks. It wasn't necessarily the most forgiving or efficient layout, hinting at potential troubles that would become harder to ignore over time. And while its reliability and power had made it a favorite, there were costs associated with running one, costs that became harder to overlook as circumstances in the industry began to shift. Even so, during its reign, the Detroit 8V92 stood as one of the crown jewels of commercial engine manufacturing. It was part of a mid-20th century wave of progress that saw engineering meet practicality in ways that revolutionized entire industries. But no engine, no matter how dominant, exists in a vacuum. The elements that made the 8V92 an icon of its time also carried within them the seeds of its challenges. It wasn't just a question of how long the engine could keep running, but how much the industry itself could change around it. And that's where the cracks started to show. The very things that made the Detroit 8V92 a powerhouse on the highways also sowed the seeds of its decline. Its two-stroke design, known for delivering high-power output relative to its size, turned out to be a double-edged sword. While it kept trucks speeding over mountain passes with ease, it also gulped down fuel at an alarming rate. In its prime, trucks running the 8V92 typically managed only 4 to 5 miles per gallon. That might have been acceptable in an era of cheap diesel, but as fuel prices steadily climbed through the 1980s, this inefficiency started eating into profit margins. Truckers and fleet operators alike began to question whether the pure muscle of the 8V92 was worth the escalating costs of keeping it fueled. And it wasn't just about the diesel. The 8V92's design meant that it consumed more oil than its four-stroke competitors, adding yet another layer of expense. Maintaining these engines required frequent oil changes to keep everything in check, driving up labor and service costs. For owner-operators working on tight budgets or fleets managing dozens of engines, these added expenses began to pile up quickly. What used to be a trade-off for unmatched performance started looking more like a financial liability. The economic landscape was shifting, and the 8V92 wasn't adapting fast enough. Then there was the matter of emissions. The two-stroke design, while innovative for its time, had a critical flaw when it came to environmental impact. The scavenging process that helped the 8V92 generate its legendary power also led to unburned fuel escaping with the exhaust. This created higher levels of emissions than its four-stroke counterparts, and while that didn't matter much when the trucker mantra was, "Get the job done," it became a glaring issue as the government ramped up its focus on air quality. By the late 1980s, the Environmental Protection Agency began setting stricter limits on heavy-duty vehicle emissions. Starting in 1988, new standards forced manufacturers to reconsider how they built their engines, and the 8V92, in its original form, couldn't keep up without major modifications. At this point, the drawbacks were starting to outweigh the benefits. Its inefficiency made it increasingly unpopular, with fleets trying to cut fuel costs, while its environmental impact brought pressure from regulators. The rising cost of doing business with the 8V92 contrasted sharply with the growing appeal of competing engines. Four-stroke models from companies like Cummins and Caterpillar were achieving better fuel economy, burning cleaner, and taking advantage of new technological breakthroughs. These alternatives not only met the new environmental benchmarks, but also helped trucking companies save money in the long run, making them a more attractive option for an industry under financial strain. The 1994 EPA emission standards were the breaking point for the Detroit 8V92, forcing its maker into a decision that would close an entire chapter of engine history. These regulations were among the strictest the commercial trucking industry had ever seen, focusing heavily on reducing pollutants from heavy-duty diesel engines. For Detroit Diesel, the 8V92's two-stroke design presented a nearly impossible challenge. Its scavenging process, while great for delivering power, allowed unburned fuel to escape as exhaust, contributing to higher emissions. To make the 8V92 compliant, the company would have needed to introduce major design changes that risked undercutting the very power that made the engine legendary in the first place. The engine's efficiency and environmental shortcomings had been problems brewing in the background for years, but these new standards demanded answers, and Detroit Diesel couldn't afford to look the other way anymore. This wasn't a problem facing Detroit Diesel alone. The entire industry was facing a seismic shift, driven by advancements in four-stroke engine technology. Over the years, companies like Cummins and Caterpillar had refined their designs, pushing the boundaries of what these engines could do. Innovations in electronic fuel injection and turbocharging allowed four-stroke engines to deliver more precise control over fuel use. As a result, these engines became not only more fuel efficient, but also cleaner, burning less diesel for the same amount of work and emitting fewer harmful pollutants. For trucking companies that needed to stretch every dollar, this was a game changer. The appeal of the 8V92's raw power started to pale in comparison to the cost savings and environmental compliance that four-stroke engines could offer. In 1993, Detroit Diesel made a move that defined its future. The company announced it would phase out its two-stroke truck engines entirely, including the beloved 8V92, and invest heavily in developing four-stroke technology. This was a monumental shift for a company whose image had long been tied to the trademark rumble of its two-stroke designs. It wasn't a quick or easy decision. It required pouring resources into new research and development efforts, creating entirely new engines from the ground up to meet the demands of a stricter, more regulated market. The last Detroit 8V92 truck engine rolled off the production line in 1995, marking the end of an era. It wasn't mechanical failure or lack of interest that brought its reign to a close. It was the changing demands of the world around it. From its extraordinary performance in its prime to its inability to meet the stricter standards of the 1990s, the 8V92 carried a mix of triumph and inevitability. Its story reflects how even the most celebrated innovations must evolve or risk being left behind. Even after it officially disappeared, the legend of the 8V92 endured. For many truckers, it remains a symbol of a time when power and durability ruled the highways, unencumbered by the regulations and compromises that came later. But its end also came with a lesson. No matter how iconic, even the strongest machines are bound by the realities of economics, technology, and the environment. That lesson continues to shape the trucking industry's innovations today, a reminder of the fine line between staying true to your roots and adapting to a changing future. Even long after the Detroit 8V92 disappeared from production, its legacy continues to stand out. It's a reminder of how even the most powerful innovations can fall behind when they fail to adapt. The engine ruled an era of trucking where performance mattered above all, but changing priorities like sustainability and efficiency forced the industry to move on. Today, truck enthusiasts still celebrate the 8V92's distinctive roar and marvel at the engineering that made it a powerhouse of its time. Its story highlights the challenge industries face today, balancing progress with preserving the very spirit of what makes something iconic.